everybody. A very good afternoon and a very warm welcome to FSC Connect. This is our platform connecting the financial services marketplace, as you know, around key topics right across our sector. We're in for a treat today because we're exploring the conversation around good governance, and really that's been a theme and a flavour in the New Zealand marketplace for a number of years now. So I'm delighted to welcome you to today's show, but in particular delighted to welcome KP, who is the CEO of the Institute of Directors, who is on the eve of a very large conference. So we're really grateful for her time joining us today. I won't tell you too much about KP because I know Trish and KP will explore a bit about that, but suffice to say that she is an award-winning podcaster, which came through just recently. So really interested and excited to hear some of the big and key themes taking place in the world of governance. And sitting beside KP is Trish Oakley, who's head of Summer KiwiSaver at Forsyth Bar. Trish is also the co-chair of the FSC's KiwiSaver Committee, the co-chair of our research committee. She is also on the board of the IOD, on the board of the Lotteries Commission, and is the deputy chair of Otago University. So we have a fantastic and capable team today leading us on a conversation around the big issues in governance. As with most FSC events, we are recording. It's also very interactive, so please ask your questions. And today, I think for one of the first times ever, we're going to be doing some polling. So just keep a lookout on your little chat bar at the bottom for some polling questions, and we'll try and share those at the end. And with that, a very warm welcome, and hand you in the very capable hands of Trish and KP. Kia ora, and thanks for joining.
Kia ora, Richard, and thank you very much for the warm welcome. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge the work that yourself and the FSC team do in highlighting the key issues and bringing them into our community. But hi, KP, welcome. It is fantastic to spend some time with you. As Richard mentioned, you're on the eve of our big conference in Auckland. I'm sure most people on the call will know about the Institute of Directors, but perhaps can you just give us a quick run through of who we are, what we do, how long you've been with us, and maybe a little bit about the conference as well.
Yeah, wonderful. Kia ora, everybody. It's really wonderful to be joining you and to, having this great conversation with Trish. Of course, Trish is on our board here at the Institute of Directors, so in some ways it feels a little bit like my performance review. So we'll sort of see how we get on, and you'll be able to give me a score. Maybe we can add that as one of the polling questions at the end, as to see how we go. So the Institute of Directors is the professional body that represents and supports directors here in New Zealand. We have 10,500 members representing everyone from not-for-profits and school boards of trustees right through to NZX listed and Deloitte top 200 organisations. We're spread right across the country and with really 8 wonderful branches right throughout New Zealand. And we connect directors and really help them in their journey as they sort of try and create great organisations which help create strong communities and a really stronger New Zealand. We have our conference here in Auckland on Thursday and Friday this week. We've got almost sold out. We've got about 10 seats left to hit the 600 mark and another 100 or so online. And that's our big annual event. So it's going to be really wonderful to see everyone together. And of course, after COVID, it's been 18 months or almost 2 years since we've had everyone together to that extent. So it's going to be really nice to see everyone reconnecting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next couple of days. We are interested in the people on the call, their perspective, and we've got the first poll up there in terms of what's keeping you awake most at night. So feel free to jump into the poll, and Rich is going to cover that in his wrap at the end. We're also obviously interested in your Q&A, and KP and I will attempt to pick them up as we go through today's conversation. We thought we might kick off, KP, with a bit of a chat around the annual Directors Sentiment Survey that you run. So we're up to the 9th survey, and I think August, September last year, and you got around 1,000 perspectives from across the director community. And I think from there, you're overlaying international governance trends to form the top 5. So a big piece of work helps shape what we do each year. And one of the themes for 2023, of course, is financial resilience.
Yeah.
So it's been a tough year. I'm pretty keen to unpack what you're encouraging boards to have a conversation about in terms of inflation, the economic environment, interest rates, and what that looks like around the board tables.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, the Director Sentiment Survey, something we do every year, and it's really important that you noted that August-September period. So if we kind of think about what was going on in the economy at that time, what was happening in the community, Auckland was still coming off the back of some of the lockdown areas, and we were getting all of that sort of commentary, recessions coming. And so it was really interesting in terms of the results that, and, you know, I'm really interested in people's perspectives as to how they can help us kind of unpick some of this. 68% of the directors at that time told us that they were expecting significant decline in the economic environment for the next 12 months, expecting the economy to be declining. But then on the flip side of that, over 50% of them said that they actually expected their organisations to outperform and to actually improve the economic performance over the next 12 months. So, you know, trying to balance those two things together. And I know they technically can both be strictly, true and literally true. It just doesn't really kind of make sense, though, from that perspective, that we're all expecting these really heavy trade wins to come in, yet at the same time, my organisation's going to be okay. And if we think about the nature of the New Zealand economy and how connected we all are, that was a really interesting kind of shift for us. If we look at the sort of breakdown across the economy in terms of the directors we spoke to, really clear message from those listed leading directors, NZX listed organisations, they were in the high or mid 80s saying that actually the economic performance was going to decline. So they were most pessimistic. And our government department directors were the most optimistic. So perhaps, you know, understanding that they had a stream of income that was pretty steady from their perspective, and they weren't going to be expecting to be facing some of those same trade wins. But as a result of the sort of the survey and other things, we identify 5 top risks or 5 kind of key areas or things for directors to be focused on every year. And as you noted, one of those is financial resilience. So some really clear messaging about boards making sure that they're looking at cash flow, that they're looking at their banking arrangements and banking covenants, that they're looking at their supply chain, balancing up this really hard line about, am I holding too much stock, but also not moving to just-in-time management, because we got caught out with that, didn't we, over COVID? You know, we'd stripped all of this sort of stuff and made sure that we had, you know, these balance sheets that were really working for us. But then what's happened is that in that move to just-in-time management, then when the supply chains and other issues started to collapse on us, we couldn't get the things that we needed to. So we're starting to see people hold a little bit more stock, but they need to do that on a sort of conscious basis. And you know, everyone on the call will have seen some of the commentary today from Ritan's, from Fisk, from PwC about the end of the sugar rush. I think the sugar crash he was talking about today in terms of the insolvencies that we're starting to see. So, you know, those director sentiments have shown through in terms of the behaviours we're now starting to see companies come under significant kind of pressure, and that inflationary environment's just not showing, even with that slight shift that we saw recently, it's actually it's not showing any signs of slowing down with regards to some of the increasing costs that we're seeing across businesses.
AP, you've touched on supply chain question from the audience. Have directors learned from COVID response how to manage through the bad times? So that's one facet. What else would you say in that regard?
So I think the answer is yes. Because, you know, we're seeing, if we look at the number of lockdowns, etc., we built up muscle memory, didn't we? Right. So, you know, so the first lockdown was tough. The second one was tough, but the third one we kind of got, okay, you get into a bit of an understanding. If nothing else, they had good cash flow management in place by that point. They'd worked out how to work remotely and those sorts of aspects. They started to understand more deeply who their supply chain and those relationships are, which when we start talking about climate, it's going to become critically important, the connectedness of all of these things in terms of the ecosystem. But I was catching up with Dame Therese Walsh and Greg Foran this morning, Chair and CEO of Air New Zealand, and we were having a conversation about how, they were having to lead through the crisis, but then also how they're having to return to post-crisis, and how you and what the lessons were that they've learned from that. And actually each crisis becomes a little bit easier as you build up some of that muscle memory and those skill sets to do that. I do, however, worry that we're still seeing organisations not adapting their risk management approach to the extent of understanding that all of these things are an ecosystem and that risks don't occur within individual swim lanes. And so if we think about the connectedness of all those things, the sort of the kind of standard risk matrix that we'd follow 3 by 3 and put all those things in, that works for some risks. I think the new risks that we're facing that showed us through COVID and frankly technology and other things, which I think we're going to have a conversation about as well, is that risk management framework does need to shift. And if boards have not made that adjustment to be thinking about the total system of risk, and of course opportunities that flow from that, then it's going to be those ones that come out of left field that are going to continue to surprise us. I anecdotally had heard that it was only Christchurch Airport was the only board that I heard of who had pandemic risk closing global borders for more than 12 months on their risk register. And a lot of us had pandemics, but we had regional pandemics thinking, oh, well, if it impacts the North Island, we can operate from the south and vice versa and all of those things. I think that's reflective of their now chair, who was chair of their Audit and Risk Committee, who thinks about risk as a systemic, connected ecosystem. So to answer John's question on that point, I'm not sure that we're seeing enough of that yet, and I'd really encourage more boards to be thinking about it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And John's popped a second question in there for us in terms of how accommodating are shareholders of redundant costs, and referencing the recent Kiwi Rail example. I'm in Auckland at the moment, but I live in Lower Hutt, and my kids take the train to school and got caught up in all of that. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Wellington trains are disrupted at the moment because Kiwi Rail has only one track testing machine. Who knew? And frankly, the fact that there's only one in the country has made everyone kind of scratch their heads. And it's 3 years to buy a new one. So in terms of supply chains and other issues of that, how accommodating shareholders of redundant costs? Well, I guess the first question is something like that. Is it a redundant cost? So there's a first question. And I think that's part of the systemic risk assessment, isn't it? That actually we don't want Kiwi Rail to have an unlimited number of these sorts of machines lying around New Zealand not being used. But the thought of having one of them and not having any sort of backup would indicate that maybe there should be more than one, right? So, what is the redundant cost? Is it 2 or is it 3 or is it 4? That's part of the board exercise, isn't it, of actually having the conversation about what that means. And I have pretty regular catch-ups, and we have good conversations with Oliver Mander and his team over at the Shareholders Association. And actually, we're pretty aligned on most issues. I think actually, there's some issues around the edges in terms of, particular shareholder rights and changes that they'd perhaps like to see. But generally, shareholder interests and directors' interests and organisations and companies' interests are aligned. So here in New Zealand, we have a firm legal obligation to the company, not to the shareholder. So, quite different from that American model. And I think depending upon the nature of the organisation and shareholders, we are seeing, shareholders who are locking in for the long term. We're seeing much more increase in institutional investors.
And they're the ones who've been driving a lot of this ESG related change. So some of those kind of redundant cost conversations, they're going, resilience is actually what we need to be building in. And shareholders have actually got a huge appetite for resilience.
Let's move away from the economy and pick up another key theme at the moment, which is cyber. And CERT has been really clear, no such thing as a quiet time. At the Institute, we've had our own experiences. We've got latitude. Yeah, it's pretty tough. And we've had latitude, obviously, in the market as well. What are you seeing in terms of boards, how they're discussing it? What is the work that's going on? How are they maturing their approach to cyber generally?
This is one that's worrying me probably more than anything. So in addition to my role here at the IOD, I'm also the Deputy Chair for the Global Network of Directors Institutes. And that's the community of IODs from around the world. And I take over as the Global Chair in July. When I speak to my colleagues and we do the research across the global director community, the number one issue keeping directors awake in the UK, in Singapore, in Australia, in the US and in Canada is cyber. Yet when we survey here in the New Zealand context, it doesn't even make the top 3. So that is really of concern that directors here in New Zealand either feel really complacent that we're okay and, naively think that New Zealand won't get attacked and, that we're too small or it's okay down here, or they believe that they've actually got cyber sorted and, that we're the first country in the world to have sorted out, how to keep ourselves safe from a cyber perspective. I don't think that's likely to be true. And so when we did the director sentiment survey, just over half, only 54% of the directors said that they're regularly discussing cyber risks, and that they believe that they have the organisational capacity and capability to respond to a cyber attack. And then when we talk about things like privacy, which is related to cyber, only 46% of the directors are regularly discussing privacy practices and risks. And related to that, one of the most concerning statistics for me was we asked them how many of them had overseen a cyber attack in the last 12 months. So 13.5% of the directors told us that they had overseen a cyber attack. But worryingly, 14.9%, so 15% of them weren't sure. So they clearly haven't overseen it. They don't even know if they've overseen it or not. So more, 15% more people said that they weren't even sure if they'd overseen one in the last, 12 months. And if we look at those overseas trends, so the FSC, the US regulator, is putting in some cyber provisions, also some climate, putting cyber provisions into directors' duties and regulations right now. So companies will be required to include what the board of directors' cybersecurity experience and their resumes are in their public disclosures. So what skills you have on cyber as a director and on your board will be public information. They also have to disclose, as part of the new changes, what their governance methods and sort of processes are to be able to manage cyber risks as part of their SEC filings. And they're also bringing in compulsory reporting, similar to some of the provisions we have here around privacy, but they do have to report within 4 days of increasing cyber risks and breaches that they've got. So we're seeing a huge shift in the US market where all of the directors are now trying to upskill as quickly as they can on cyber because they're going to have to declare that. Yet here in New Zealand, we've got half the board saying, we talk about cyber, the other half saying, maybe we don't. And, it's not even hitting the top 3 issues. So, We've really got to do more to make sure we're paying attention to this because it's a case of if, not when, right?
So totally need to do more here. Do you think we've still got it stuck as an IT team issue as opposed to a firm-wide issue to be talking about and working through?
Yeah, it certainly is. And we're hearing that from the CISO community when we talk to them, because we've been working with the cybersecurity community about how do we make sure that, that directors are upskilling, and how do we get more information into boards about this. And they report back that they're having difficulty getting cut through at the boards because, the people think, oh, that's an IT team issue. We just expect you to get that sorted. And similarly, from the board perspective, again, it comes down to that perspective of thinking about risk within swim lanes. Now, if you're thinking about a total risk perspective, then all of a sudden cyber becomes really important. If you take an old-fashioned approach to risk, you might have cyber risk as, or a cyber breach as a particular individual line item, and there'll be all these other sort of risks going on in your organisation. But when you think about cyber and technology being a connected risk, or it being part of the ecosystem, if you have anything happen in terms of a cyber breach, then there's reputation risk, because that's going to be associated with that. There's going to be financial risk, because you're not going to be able to, you're going to lose customers, or you're going to have restitution you're going to have to make. There's going to be organisational risk in terms of staff confidence if you're losing staff data and all of those pressure points. You've got regulatory risk, because you're going to have the regulator all over you. You're going to have insurance risk, because you won't be able to get insurance. We're seeing a real hardening of the insurance market within cyber. Some of the our American colleagues have reported with regards to the governance trends they're seeing there, 400% losses for cyber insurers in the US in the last 12 months. So here in New Zealand, the insurance markets often see us as a state of Australia. The Australian trends, they're a little further ahead of us, and it's a lot harder. So we're seeing some of that leak across here too. Hard for organisations to even get cyber insurance. There's got to be quite a significant shift in the way we're thinking about cyber if we're going to take it seriously.
I think what I'm seeing is where organisations have got really solid response plans. They've worked out how it impacts right across the organisation and bringing everybody on their journey and the role that they play. But the other good piece of work that you see is around simulations. Are you seeing a number of boards getting out there and actually doing some live scenario plans and working through what it looks like?
Yeah, there's nothing like building up that muscle memory, isn't it? It's one thing to sort of have a policy on paper, but it's quite another to sort of to feel the heat of that, and to sort of actually see how your organisation's going to perform under pressure. And at conference this week, we've actually, one of our breakout sessions is called Cyber, the Board Game, and so we're actually going to be putting the attendees through a little cyber breach scenario so that they can sort of see the issues and challenges. And of course, the big thing about this is future planning, because when you're in the midst of it, you don't have time to stop, pause, let's call a board meeting, let's prepare some papers, let's have a conversation about what's our view on ransom, who do we reply to, actually, what's our approach on communication, do we know who the regulators are and what our duties are. All of that stuff's got to be, in place in advance, so it can just happen in real time, really, really fast. And the biggest thing actually for boards in those circumstances, set it up and then get out of the way, get management to get on with it, because it will move super fast.
Spoken like a true CEO. Very, very good advice for us. I'm looking forward to chairing that session, KP, and the people in the room are going to enjoy it. But there's a question from Jamie online. So for those who aren't attending the conference, are there any courses re cyber risk you'd recommend in New Zealand, IOD or otherwise? It is quite a skill to build up. So what do you think is the best way to approach learnings in this area?
So two things I would have a look at is CERT actually has some little learning modules and some information on their website. So that it's government sponsored, and that it's going to be well established. And the other is Cordia or Aura, have also got some modules on there. They're introductory modules, but I've found, in terms of my learning, quite useful to sort of start some of those foundation learning pieces. And then beyond that, I'd need to put some thought into it, but I think we can definitely come back. it's really hard to find the right level if you're not a techie person, so there's lots of stuff for CISOs and for IT teams and those other things, but actually how to sort of go some actual, dedicated learning for those of us who aren't in that space. Lots of articles and things we can refer you to. We've been doing some webinars for our members and making them free, a series of them specifically on cyber to try and help them upskill, because it's so important, right down to what are SIS controls, what are NIST controls, what should you be looking at, and, what is a DDoS attack and those sorts of things. So just exploring some of those topics. But I'd start with CERT, I'd start with Cordia or Aura. They're also the sort of government cyber company, and then do a little bit more of a deep dive from there.
And in the same way, you have people come in and do refresher health and safety training with your boards, having them come in and speak to the board is an obvious first step as well. Hey, look, related to cyber KP is emerging technologies, and I'm excited by this. I'm a big fan of ChatGPT. Came out in November last year, and it's rocketed to 100 million users just like that. You can overlay any other AI, crypto, metaverse, all that's come along. It's changing the way that we live. It's changing the way we interact with our customers, their expectations, and how things work. A lot of implications for business generally, and particularly in financial services, because it will change customer expectations. A lot of things to think about. What is the conversation that you're seeing with directors around emerging technologies?
Again, it's a bit like the cyber one on this point, and it was really interesting in terms of the feedback from the Director Sentiment Survey. Artificial intelligence was only ranked 7th on the list of future trends that boards were paying attention to, with only 14% of them noting it. Now, remember, again, this was August and September, so I'm really interested to see the results this coming year, to see how many have increased their use of AI as a result of ChatGPT. But in terms of the director community capability, only 37%. So, just on 40% of directors said that their boards had the right capability to lead the organisation's digital future. So there's a huge capability gap there around board tables in terms of the directors of the future that we're going to need, and boards identifying that skill set. But in terms of the core things that we're really trying to help boards with and really encourage them to do on new technology is the first thing is lean into it, get involved in it, try some stuff, keep engaged and keep learning. And that's a really important foundation stone for all of us as directors, because technology is moving so fast that even if we recruited who was the best tech person from sort of 4 years ago and put them on our board today, tech's moved so fast in those 4 years. We don't need directors on boards who can code, and we don't necessarily need them in our management teams and our executive teams either. What we need is people who are prepared to lean into technology and are learning and are constantly sort of able to sort of test and the risks and the opportunities around that. The big 4 things around technology is, my little summary of how I kind of call it, is ROAR, R-O-A-R, right? So what are the risks of this technology, and what does that mean for us in terms of not only risks to our own organisation in terms of how it might impact us, but what are the risks of how our competitors are going to use it? And I think sometimes we often don't think about that. We think about the risks of the individual technology to us, not how somebody else might be using it. The second is the O, which is the opportunities. Always remember your risks also got a flip side of opportunities. So what are the opportunities that something like ChatGPT could really do? And if we think about chatbots, if we think about improving our communications, if we think about the efficiency and speed of being able to write articles, to be able to get content out, to be able to do all these amazing, amazing things, ChatGPT's got some huge opportunities for us, and there's some huge opportunities from a business perspective as well. The A is about access, and access links to privacy. So when you're thinking about new technology, think about that access aspect, because privacy is the number one consideration of our consumers when it's coming to new technology, right? So, and that's an old thing. If it's free, you are the product. And privacy is a number one consideration. And we're particularly seeing increasing fines in New Zealand, very small, $10,000 fine, not enough to actually for large organisations to really change your behaviour too much, but the reputation related to that is much, much more than the Privacy Commissioner will ever kind of set on you as a fine. And your number 4 of your R is, to finish that off, is your regulation. What's going to be coming at you from a regulator perspective? What are they going to be expecting from you? You guys in the financial services sector know this more than anyone. You know, the most regulated industry we've got, probably short of airlines. So it is, we know that the regulators are constantly falling behind with the new technology. So where are they going to get to, and where are they going to get to fast, and what those expectations on, and how is that kind of going to be regulated, and how do we sort of prepare for that? But we'd love to see more executives and directors playing with some of this technology. At the IOD, Trish, we're still really early on in our journey about what ChatGPT could mean for us. We're using it internally with some of our systems, and using it for some products, and in terms of particularly in the writing and content space, and seeing how that works. We've had some good conversations with the staff about the limitations and privacy around ChatGPT, and we've had to remind people, you don't put personal data in there, don't put customer or member data into it, nothing in terms of that's commercially sensitive, because it is going to be released out to the wild. So any of that stuff in your commercial IP, make sure that's protected. And then another little thing for us is that we have chartered member exams for people to become chartered members of the IOD, and they have to do a written assignment, and we've had to make sure that people understand that it's got to be their own work. So so there's all these little things that can change and shift along an organisation just from that one technology little piece. It's huge opportunities, but there's some risks and some sort of low-level operational issues that it's already impacting on for us, and I expect it's just going to become more and more part of our everyday use, right?
Balance of risk and opportunity, right? What do you think board meetings are going to look like? How's technology going to change that?
Well, I've actually been playing with the HoloLens today. So if I don't know if anyone's had a chance to play with the HoloLens yet, but this is what we think the boardroom of the future is going to look like. So instead of tuning up for your Zoom call, you'll be putting this on, and I'll be able to dial straight in to be able to see you. So it's amazing technology, and basically little holograms popping up instead of a Zoom call. So we've got a really great little scenario that we've built, just as a not-for-profit. It's only a small little 3-minute scenario about thinking about how boardrooms of the future kind of could operate. It'll be interesting in terms of what impact that has on things like our carbon footprints and the usability of all these types of technology. But that technology is available right now, right? So in 5 years' time, no doubt we'll be zooming in as holograms. Our diligent board packs will just be floating in the air in front of us, and it'll be quite a different world.
It's been curious and giving things a go, right? You've leaned into climate impacts on that. So that is, I guess, another big conversation in financial services. And, everyone's moving to a low emissions economy. We've got reporting, we've got strategy, we've got risk management, and there'll be any number on the call today that are captured or voluntarily reporting. It's been a rough start to the year as well. So chat us through what the conversations in the boardroom are looking like from a climate perspective.
Yeah, so while I said cyber wasn't at least in the top 3, here in New Zealand, climate is. So we are much further advanced in terms of the climate conversations than our global colleagues. So one of the things we've done here in New Zealand is that we're the host on behalf of the World Economic Forum for Chapter 0 New Zealand, which is the Directors Climate Governance Initiative. And that's in organisations that are set up around the world who are supporting directors on their climate governance journey. And we've made that at the IOD freely available, and you don't have to be an IOD member to join, specifically because the climate governance is just such an important and critical issue to all organisations. And just to balance that out, if I compare that against some of our international colleagues, there's only about 3 or 4 places in the world who aren't using the climate governance branding of Chapter 0. They're just calling it climate governance initiatives. And that is organisations in Russia, in America, and in Australia. So that gives you a bit of an indication of where those markets are with regards to climate and climate reporting. Having said that, Australia is coming up super fast behind us, right? And so if we like to think about those trans-Tasman battles, while New Zealand is ahead on the climate reporting at the moment, Australia is coming up behind us really, really fast. Last night, the XRB celebrated the launch of their new climate reporting requirements. So they, we have most of the people on this call, or many of them on this call, will be reporting entities. I think the key thing is, even if you're not a reporting entity right now, you may well want to be one in the future as your organisation grows. But most importantly, you are likely to be Scope 3 emissions for someone else. And so we're going to see a sort of rising tide of all organisations being expected to know their number. What does that mean? What are your carbon emissions? If nothing else, you will be expected to know that number. And through your supply chain arrangements, someone's going to come asking you about that at some point. And then what are you doing to contribute to a low emissions economy? We're seeing the climate was one of the top 3 issues that directors identified as the future trends that they were focused on. So here in New Zealand, there is quite good engagement, but it's still not at the levels that it needs to be, given the level of reporting and challenge coming through. There is so much for directors to be upskilling on in this area. So not only have we got the arrangements coming in around climate reporting, but we've also got the TCNFD, so the nature disclosures as well are also coming up really, really fast. And if we think about the climate disclosures, how difficult that has been to try and get some industry, scenarios in place. When you start thinking about nature, when actually that is different in regional locations, it is going to be different across different organisations. That's going to be even more complex. We had a number of legal opinions, both with regards to climate and with regards to nature, just recently, which have confirmed that climate is a director liability issue. So this is probably the issue of our time, I think. So it really is changing the way boards are having to think about, their future, their investment, their reporting, and how they're sort of structuring themselves and understanding who's in your supply chain and what sort of impact are they having from a carbon perspective.
Yeah, and look, thanks for referencing Chapter 0 KP, because it's a fantastic way to help people get up to speed. And somebody has raised a question around good resources or further education. And I often get asked that down here in Otago Southland by members, and Chapter 0 is the best place to start in engaging with your local director community. And I think reaching out and asking others how they're having the conversations around the table is really useful as well. We have put our second poll up around ESG as a whole, so I'd encourage you to jump in and pop your answer in there. But KP, chat to us about greenwashing. That has certainly hit the front page news. There is zero tolerance for it, and rightly so. And we'll see increased regulator focus in this area, I'm sure. So chat us through greenwashing.
Yeah, so greenwashing is a concern that organisations are overstating their environmental benefits or impact, and that it's just sort of kind of PR puffery, right? So the regulators are particularly concerned about that. They're concerned that consumers may not be able to identify that. So in terms of kind of fair trading provisions, and as a result of that, we're seeing much greater attention and awareness going on to the calculation and reporting around what you're actually doing. And so one of the kind of ways that we're seeing that big shift is that when sustainability became a bit of a thing, and sort of organisations were starting to green themselves a little bit more, maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago, a lot of that was coming from the perspective of being run by and supported by the marketing teams, because they could see the shift. They could see that this is what consumers were calling for. This is that they could see that there was societal, social license changes coming because they were so connected to that community and consumer kind of shift. And what we're seeing now, particularly with the introduction of the reporting requirements, is that climate's actually becoming the responsibility of the finance team. So it's such a huge shift in terms of where that's starting to fall in organisations that all of a sudden, hang on a minute, we need to be able to audit this. Hang on a minute, we need to be able to measure this. If we're making these statements that we're doing these things, we need to get some assurance over this. And what is this going to look like? And so there's been quite a shift in the way that organisations are responding around that greenwashing aspect. There's been, there's a high-profile case in Australia who, where they're being the regulators taking action against them, and that's got some process to go through yet around greenwashing. We're seeing a lot of it come out of the UK, Europe in particular. They are miles ahead of us on regards to their climate expectations. So, a lot of greenwashing claims coming out of Europe. You'll see one tonight on the news. I see the coverage today of Coke with their Sprite bottles being changed from green to clear to enable them to be more recyclable because the green plastic wasn't as popular for recyclable use. And there's a lot of claims in the media today that's greenwashing, right? That actually the bottles still aren't any more recyclable than they used to be, etc. I'm not an expert on all of that stuff, but the media article was, is a good thing that they've done. Greenwashing claims already coming straight away. And then what we're starting to see in the director community is a bit of what's called green hushing. And that's organisations that are going, we're going to keep our powder dry on this. We're not going to be sharing our story about the work that we're doing just yet. Let's get our house in order. Let's do some work. Let's make sure we know what our number is. We've got some things in place. Let's wait till we've actually got some good news to announce and it's been in place for a few years and we can test it and we can audit it. So I think that's a pity, because one of the things we need is we need organisations to set ambitious goals. We need particularly those corporates that are well known to be seen to be leading the way so that the rest of us can see what good looks like and maybe we can try that too. But from a director perspective, it's pretty tough at the moment because, we're asking them to set some goals that will help lead to a low emissions economy, for 2050. But actually some of the technology to achieve that is not yet known. We've at conference, for example, we've got the team from Fonterra doing a fast facts about methane. So that we can all sort of upskill and learn a little bit about what's happening there, because you can't talk about New Zealand's climate emissions without thinking about Fonterra and without thinking about methane. But they're doing huge investment to try and address that. But, at the moment, it's investment and it's trials and they think they'll get there. But at the moment, it's not like there's just something that they can be assured they will. So, that's pretty hard for directors to say, hey, let's set some targets without knowing how they can get there yet. So there's a huge leap of faith. And as a result, greenwashing pressures are going to continue, I think.
Indeed. AP, let's switch to people and another one of the top 5 themes. So shared value from organisations to people, profit to shared value, me to we. And that came out of the survey. And at the end of the day, all of us, we get up each day and we want to work for somebody where we feel like we're aligned to what they stand for, their values, and as the organisation as a whole, and a lot of emphasis around culture as well. How are you seeing boards reflect on culture, on their values, their social licence, and pulling all this together from the employee perspective?
Yeah, so this was the number one issue that came out of the Directors' Sentiment Survey. So while, cyber and climate may not have been the number ones, the number one issue that came up was labour quality and capability. So the directors here in New Zealand are incredibly focused on talent. That was the number one. And actually, it was kind of like the number 3 issue as well. So number 1 was labour quality and capability. Number 2 was supply chain disruption. But number 3 was immigration policy, right? So immigration policy is related to talent. So, that's kind of the same as the first one about quality and capability of talent, which indicates is, when you combine those kind of numbers, it was 80% of the directors who said this is the number one issue that's keeping me up at night is, how do I attract and retain the right people? This group more than any will understand issues around Hayne inquiry, around remuneration policies, the unintended consequences of some of those, and the impact of culture. They'll understand, the impact of, how important culture is in organisations and to its success. We've seen huge wage pressure and inflation pressure. We're also starting to see quite a shift around with some of those changes around things like fair pay agreements coming in. So, it's been a long time for some organisations since they've really had to have any employee relations experience, strikes and lockouts. Some of those are back on the table, seeing quite a big shift. So if organisations aren't focusing on shared value, how do organisations share their success? How well, we've seen a lot of pressure around things like super profits in some industries at the same time as there's, staffing pressures going on. Then they're going to lose the war for talent, right? So not only from a perspective about being able to retain and attract the best people, but also from a perspective of consumers. Consumers are now looking for greater understanding about, do you have a social license to operate? Are you a good place to work? Are you the kind of place I want to buy products from? And we're starting to see that come through in things like gender pay gap reporting, for example. Our Australian colleagues have had gender pay gap for a long time, but just in the last week or so have announced that they're reducing the reporting threshold from about 200 down to 100. So if you have 100 staff, you'll now have compulsory gender pay gap reporting. We have voluntary gender pay gap reporting here in New Zealand, but there is a push for legislative change. And, from the discussions we're having with some of the officials and ministers, it's an election year, so not much is going to move through, but there is an appetite for compulsory gender pay gap reporting here in New Zealand as well. So transparency over your employment relationships and those aspects, and transparency generally, again, part of that ecosystem, that's just the new way of doing business. And it's been quite a significant shift.
Maybe related to that, which we dare to everyone on this call, is COFI and all about conduct, right, and treating our consumers fairly. I'm keen on your perspective in terms of how boards wrap themselves around this from the helicopter view in terms of whether it's policy or process systems. It's that helicopter versus in the detail. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, and we talk about all the time about the line between governance and management, like it's actually a thing. Like that it's real and that we can kind of touch it, and that, the surveying department could kind of put pins down and draw a line and it's just an agreed line. And of course it's not, right? And we talk about sort of noses in and hands out and all of those kind of aspects. But the reality is that line shifts, and that line shifts depending upon the topic, depending upon the risk profile, the shifts and things that are happening in the organisation, and depending upon the people, right? So if you've got someone in a newer management role, that line's going to shift because the board's going to come up a little bit closer to it, and vice versa. So when we talk about things like the helicopter and keeping up in it, it's also important that, remembering that helicopters come down too, right? That they just aren't up kind of floating over the top. It is important that boards are coming through. But the big thing about the helicopter is looking forward, right? It's not just kind of the overview of the whole thing. It's actually what is that horizon, right? And that's one of the reasons we specifically called the app that we developed in terms of helping directors build their Māori and their te reo competency HOTU, because that's the name that's given to the paddler in the waka that is looking and keeping the time and the direction, the navigator in the waka. And because that's what governance is all about, right? Is that kind of helicopter HOTU, is they're the person who are providing that kind of direction and lens. But it all comes down to reporting, doesn't it? It all comes down to conduct. Even an organisation of our size, we're 70 people. So a small organisation compared to the organisations of the people on the call. But as CEO, I am responsible for every email and every interaction that comes out of the organisation. I don't read every email. We've got 10,500 members. God bless them. Some of them think that I do actually personally send them the emails that come out each week with updates about what's going on, and that's wonderful. The only way you can do, to have trust in the organisation is to know you've got some good systems, some good people, and you're getting some reporting. And that's true for boards as well around conduct. But that's why if you're in a management position and you feel like you've got the board all over you from a conduct perspective, and this is high stakes stuff. Like for me as a director, as a manager, if I have a bad day at work, I'm going to get fired. Not ideal. But Trish, if she has a bad day at the office as a director, she's going to go to jail and she's going to lose her house, right? So the stuff's important. I think understanding and communicating what these regimes mean at a human level, sharing the stories about what this actually means and why this is in place, and why these things are important, that absolutely improves the culture of the organisation with regards to reporting and regulatory frameworks, and then understanding the importance of that reporting. And then boards have to lean into that reporting. It can't just be seen as a information matter. They've actually got to be engaging with it, and that takes time.
A reminder of yours and my responsibilities, KP. Thank you. Hey, you've touched on HOTU. Can you just give us a quick overview of what it is and where people can get it if they're looking to upskill in this area?
Yeah, the app's free. It's called HOTU, and it's got the IOD logo on the front. You'll be able to find it in any of the app stores to be able to download. And look, it's a variation of there's, you may see other versions or other things around. But what we've done is tried to give directors a little guide in their pocket. So it's got some information around tikanga. So if you're perhaps going to be invited to a marae, what to expect. It's got some information around some greetings, and it's got assistance with pronunciation. So that's a really useful part of the resource. It's also got things like a waiata in there. So if you're being called on to do a waiata, as Trish and I will be at conference this week, then it's got some guidance in there. So things that you can practice at home before a board meeting. It's got some karakia in there. Perhaps if you've been asked to do an opening or a close for a meeting, or kai karakia for a blessing of food. And those sorts of aspects, because it's such a hugely important part of what makes New Zealand a really wonderful place to be, and a huge part of our place in the world. And it's a really critical part of a skill set that all of us need to improve on, and we're just trying to make that as easy as possible for people.
Yeah, look, it's a fabulous app and I use it a lot. And it's nice to lean into the next question, which we were going to touch a little bit on diversity. We've talked about this for many years, diversity in different ways. But there's a lot of work, particularly at the moment, around diversity from a cultural perspective. So from a Māori and Pacifica point of view, those conversations around the table and activities you're seeing, give us a quick overview of that.
Yeah, huge shifts. So it's one of the areas that directors are doing their most significant part of their learning and their development. And we're seeing huge shifts in terms of the representation coming at board level. At the moment, a lot of the reporting, unfortunately, is mainly from the government sector, because they've got much more transparent reporting. And for a lot of organisations, it's voluntary as to how much they're reporting around their gender and ethnic statistics across their boards. But yeah, a number of the boards that we're seeing are really trying to increase their capability, but also increase their representation across their boards. We know that more diverse boards, in its broader sense, have much better performance in a broad range of measures, right? So it's not just about individual share price. It's about their attraction and retention of staff. We know it improves attraction and retention of consumers. We know that diverse organisations also have better risk management processes. And if we think back to sort of where we started this conversation about how critical risk management is and its totality to all of the issues that we're facing, then why wouldn't you want to be unlocking some of the superpowers powers that come with having much greater diversity across your board level. So, by definition, boards are there to recognise that we need diversity. Because if we felt that one individual knew all of the answers and could be perfectly formed to have all of the skills that we'd need, we'd just have a CEO. We wouldn't even need the board, right? So by definition, boards are there to recognise that diversity of thought and skills coming to a team environment improves outcomes, so that we've got different people looking at things through a different lens to make sure that there's no blind spots and we don't miss stuff. So yeah, I'm really excited to see huge pipeline, great people there ready to serve, and we're seeing huge shifts, which is really encouraging.
Embrace it, right? KP, last question, very briefly. It's election year, political neutrality. Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, it's been a really difficult one for the director community, as many of you may have seen a lot of the media coverage around Rob Campbell, one of our really senior chartered fellows, who was removed from a couple of his board roles with regards to statements that he made on LinkedIn that weren't considered to be politically neutral. It is really important that chairs recognise in particular, but the directors also, they're never off duty anymore. Right. So, it's a really interesting conversation about whether you can ever actually hold a personal view publicly in some of those types of roles, because our boards and our directors are so much more visible. I mean, 20, 25 years ago, I don't think most people could probably have told you who the chair of most of these organisations are, or even what a director was. But now these roles are really public-facing roles, and with that comes a lot of that pressure. But it is really important that in our public sector roles, we do have political neutrality. One of the great things about the New Zealand democratic system is that it is not political in any way compared to environments like our American colleagues. Without a doubt, we have small politics, small p politics. But we also wouldn't want to see a situation like we have in the US, where every time there is a presidential change, all of the bureaucrats and the heads and everyone else also are political appointments. They're sheriffs, they're lawyers, they're judges, all of those things. And so, the great things about our civil society and our democracy here in New Zealand is that we do have objective, continuing, trusted people who are working in those sorts of roles. And it's an important reminder for directors on boards that they need to maintain that political neutrality as well.
Thank you, KP. It is always a pleasure spending time with you. You're very generous in sharing your time, head of conference, and also your knowledge. We will share with the FSC the Director Sentiment Survey, the Top 5, Chapter 0, and HOTU app for people to tap into. We wish you all the best for the conference. And Richard, I'll hand to you to wrap and update on the polls.
Fantastic. Wow. What an awesome conversation. Could have listened to you for the next couple of hours. It was so smooth and informative. So to both of you, KP and Trish, thank you very much. If I was going to sum up just a couple of key things based on the discussion, the financial resilience piece facing boardrooms, businesses and families is big. We actually have the launch of our Financial Resilience Index tomorrow morning. So there's a direct connect there. I think the culture piece and the war for talent is massive. We're all facing into it. People have been much more selective, and in our FRI research, job security is really, really high, which has been one of the consistent themes all the way through COVID. The cyber issues, climate issues, amazing. KP, I've never seen on any of our webinars someone turn up with a Top Gun like helmet. So a kudos to you for a first, and very interested to see where that lands. And I think that last discussion around political neutrality and never being off duty is such a key message for all of us. It's almost like we can't separate our personal views from our private lives, from our positional views, and social media under your own name really doesn't cut it anymore. So a really good call out there. So in terms of our polling, our pollster has just returned into the room. Chris, I'm not sure if we're in a position to share any. There you go. Rebecca's doing it. Thank you. So poll number one, that gives you a flavour of what's big. Recessionary conditions, cost of living really plays out strongly, cyber and climate change. That really echoes what's happening in our world with our financial resilience messages. And I'm not sure if there was a second poll we wanted to share, Rebecca, as we freewheel to the end of this awesome conversation. There you go, the ESG poll, environmental, social governance, all equal seems to be the closeout there. So, folks, I think on that note, at bang on 4:30, just a huge big thank you to the audience for coming along, for engaging in the discussion, and to our awesome panelists who gave us a really in-deep and thought-provoking conversation on the key things, irrespective of your role. I think hugely relevant. We did record today, so this will be available subsequently, probably early next week. For those of you who want to get up early tomorrow morning, 8:30, we'll be in conversation with Nicola Willis, a bit of a pre-budget conversation, and then we'll be unpacking our Financial Resilience Index with Sharon Zollner, Dr. Jared Haar, and Andrew Inwood. So that augurs super well. And for now, KP, best of success with your conference. For everybody else, Kia ora, have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining. Bye for now.